What is up, guys? Welcome to my review for The Flash, Season 6, Episode 7, titled The Last Temptation of Barry Allen, Part 1. Now, right off the bat, I'll say that while Season 6 has been going very well so far, and has basically already proven itself to be better than Season 4 and 5, this episode in particular very much proves that point. This episode, I think, is better than any episode in Season 5, even like Elseworlds Part 1, the What's Past is Prologue episode, King Shark vs. Gorilla Grodd, and The Legacy. This episode, I think, is better than all of those episodes. I also think that it's the best episode of The Flash since Enter Flash Time, which at this point came out almost 2 years ago. It came out in March 2018, it's November 2019 now, so it's closer to 2 years than it is to 1 year at this point. So it's almost 2 years since they've had an episode this good, or an episode that's better than this one, which was Enter Flash Time. So I absolutely love this episode, so let's find out why that is in this review, which begins right now. So the episode begins right after the end of the last episode, where Elongated Man was attacked by Ramsey Rosso, with this episode taking place mostly the day after the last episode, and also they say that the crisis is in 2 days. It's very clear the next episode will be the day after this episode. That means episodes 6, 7, 8, and 9 will all take place within 4 days of each other, even though they came out within 5 weeks of each other in real life, which is absolutely insane. But anyway, this opening scene where Elongated Man is attacked by Bloodwork is, I think, a really good opening scene. The fight is great. The visuals, while there is some parts of it where the CGI isn't amazing, I do think that this opening scene is really good. I mean, Bloodwork, or at the time Ramsey Rosso, he was very threatening. But the main thing I like about this scene in particular is that it's probably the scene out of every scene in The Flash ever that used the Elongated Man's abilities and powers the best. The stretchiness, the way he uses it, the way that he uses it during the fight, the way he tries to dodge the blood shards that are being thrown at him, the way that he puts his hand in the sewer and then it goes out the other end and punches Bloodwork in the face. It's awesome, and this is a really great use of his abilities, which we really don't see much of because of how expensive it is, but when we do, it's so worth it. And in this episode in particular, while there is only one scene and Elongated Man himself is only in 2 full scenes, not counting the trip scenes that Barry has, it's still awesome, and this is a great opening scene because of all of those reasons. So anyway, Ralph is attacked by Ramsey, and there's this piece of blood that goes into him that is killing him, which Barry and Team Flash try to get rid of. Now, one thing I don't really love what they did here, it's probably the only part of this episode that I find to be not great, is the actual blood transfusion part, which is like this episode and the next episode completely hang on that. The fact that Barry needs to give Ralph his healing abilities so that Ralph would heal his Speed Force energy, it doesn't make sense for him to give a blood transfusion for that, because it's not based off blood, but also Barry can transfer his Speed Force abilities to other people, which we saw in Season 4, and since Ralph has metahuman abilities, and since his body is a lot more resistant than most people, in fact, any person, he probably would be able to sustain the Speed Force energy and the speed a lot longer than any non-speedster, or most non-speedsters, so I think that they could have just done that, and obviously then the plot would not have made sense, but I just think they could have come up with a better reason for Ramsey's piece of blood going into Barry. It could have just been a fight between Bloodwork and the Flash, which led to Barry being infected, but I don't know, that's one part of the episode I don't love because it kind of goes against what we know about the Speed Force, Barry's powers, and the universe. Which honestly doesn't really bother me that much. I was too engaged in this episode, like in what was happening, to really care about that logical fallacy, because literally everything else in this episode, in terms of the Flash's storyline, is absolutely amazing. After this happens, Barry goes home, and he is knocked out by the piece of blood that entered him, the piece of Bloodwork's blood, that apparently also has his consciousness, so everything he learns about Barry here, about the Flash, and about Crisis, the real Bloodwork also knows, but this is it's a really cool thing we see here. The Speed Force also shows up telling Barry what happened, and then Ramsey tries to convince Barry to join him to become a Bloodwork infected the Flash so that he could survive the crisis, and so he could save the universe and at the same time survive the crisis, which leads to Barry going through this insane like a dream where he goes from location to location where Ramsey's trying to convince him to join him. One thing, it definitely reminds me of the Spider-Man Far From Home with all the Mysterio illusions, Paragons. There's even something very similar with a graveyard or like a gravestone with all the dead people that had died in Barry's life. That we saw the same thing in Spider-Man Far From Home with Tony Stark's gravestone. And while we didn't get any zombie superheroes here, it is still very similar. And this whole sequence of events definitely reminded me of what is definitely the best part of Spider-Man Far From Home, and this is definitely also the best part of this episode. It's so well done, and like it's well shot, it's well edited, it's very well acted by Grant Gustin, and Ramsey is such a menacing and such a great villain in this storyline. But the whole thing with Barry's insane trip, which starts in his house, continues to all these other locations, like the West House, which is like one of the most disturbing scenes on The Flash ever, which works so well as Bloodwork is a very menacing and very scary villain, which is not as scary as Zoom per se, but it's a different kind of scary where he's a little bit disturbing, where in this scene, Team Flash is having Thanksgiving dinner and Ramsey shows up, which Barry is completely freaked out by, and he brings lasagna, which when Joe cuts into it, the black goo, the blood comes out of it, and it's disgusting. They use it as the sauce for what they're eating, and it's so disturbing, and it works so well. Then we see the time vault where Barry sees the newspaper that he's going to die in just 2 days, or at least he's going to disappear, which Ramsey tries to use to his advantage to get Barry to be taken over by him, which is such a great crisis storyline. I think with Barry's impending death, having a villain who defies death, and Barry is tempted, obviously hence the title of the episode, to use that villain to survive the coming crisis. It's such a great concept and storyline for this crisis, for what's going to happen, and Bloodwork is the perfect villain to use for that. But after that, we see Barry in the speed lab, where we see the graves of all the people in his life who died, like Nora, his mother, his father, as well as H.R. Wells and Martin Stein and Leonard Snart, and in the end, he sees the gravestone of Barry Allen. I kind of wanted to see the gravestone of Oliver Queen there, but obviously that wouldn't make sense because Barry doesn't know about the upcoming death of Oliver Queen, but he does know about his upcoming death, which again worked so well. Like I said earlier, it definitely reminded me of, maybe not while I was watching it, but now talking about it, it definitely reminds me of that scene for Spider-Man Far From Home where he sees Tony Stark's grave. And again, we didn't get any superhero zombies or any zombies of anybody, but it's still such a great way to do what they're doing here with the death and tempting Barry to try to use Ramsey and his abilities to survive the crisis, which all again I think works perfectly. Then there's this red room where Bloodwork uses these avatars of Ralph, Joe, and even Eobard Thawne to try to convince Barry that he shouldn't die, which is obviously a great scene. And seeing Eobard Thawne, even though it's not the real Eobard Thawne, is always really, really cool. Then it shows this random street where this woman is in a car crash. She died, but then the Flash shows up using his now Bloodwork abilities to revive her. Obviously, Ramsey is not showing Barry everything. The Flash looks like a normal Flash, but as we see later, he, being infected by Bloodwork, has this black design over his costume, making him look like the negative Flash. So there are obviously things that Ramsey is not showing Barry, so that Barry will be more tempted to use his powers, which is obviously a great tactic, and it obviously makes a lot of sense. Then it goes back to Barry's house, where he sees a baby version of Nora West Allen, but can't hold her. This is such an emotional scene. Grant Gustin's acting is absolutely amazing, and again, it really, really makes it completely believable that Barry would actually be tempted, not only be tempted by Bloodwork's offer, but actually consider it. Like, this scene in particular convinced me that Barry would be convinced here, because this is such an emotional scene that really hits home Barry not wanting to die, obviously, and what he will miss out on if he does, especially with Nora. So then we get the climax of this storyline where Barry's back in the Allen house in his old bedroom, and the Speed Force shows up telling him that he shouldn't go with Ramsey. Barry says that he can't believe that he actually believed Ramsey's lies, but then the Speed Force tells him that Ramsey wasn't lying, which is such a crazy moment for Barry himself, because now he basically has confirmation that if he goes with Ramsey and if he gives into his temptations for that, he will survive the crisis and also save the universe, and if he goes with the Speed Force, he will only only save the universe, but he won't survive, missing out on everything that Ramsey is showing him in all these dreams, which I have to say, again, they did such a great job at making it seem like Barry would be convinced to go with Bloodwork, but at the same time, because of his character, because of how heroic he was kind of like unsure of which way he would go, even though the second part, the fact there is a part 2 and the set photos definitely spoiled that he would go with Bloodwork, but at the same time, in the moment, it was definitely very unsure. But then, as Barry learns what the Speed Force tells him, Speed Force is basically telling Barry that he needs to die. Barry just goes in on the Speed Force, blaming it for all of the problems in his life, or all of his suffering, the death of his mother, his father, his daughter from the future, and all the other gravestones we saw earlier in the episode. Barry just straight up blames the Speed Force for all of it, which for some of them is definitely understandable, especially for his mother and father, who were killed by speedsters, and they would definitely be alive if the Speed Force didn't exist. And again, this is an amazing scene, so well acted by Grant Gustin, and also the cuts between this and Cisco and Frost trying to help Barry using the Velocity 10 to wake Barry up. It's so intense, it's so well edited, and it's the perfect climax to this episode. I will also say that the way Barry tries to kill the Speed Force here, and quote-unquote kills the Speed Force, in a very similar way to how Eobard killed his mother, is such a great reflection that the start of him becoming the Flash, Thawne killing his mother, it's such a great reflection that it really shows him how far he's fallen in this episode. Obviously, as a person, he's not fallen, but in this episode, being tempted by Ramsey, he certainly has, and this shows that perfectly while reflecting Thawne's murder of Nora. So Cisco uses the Velocity X or Velocity 10 to wake Barry up, and the episode plays it off like Barry wasn't taken over by Bloodwork, which again, the fact that there is a part 2 and the set photos definitely spoiled that there would be, but at the same time there's this sense of questioning of what they were actually doing here that made this all really eerie, and how Barry woke up and he seemed to be normal. And I also absolutely loved how when Iris returned after her storyline, which I will get to her storyline in a bit, she is the first and only person to notice how Barry is different, which is, it makes sense because she's closer to Barry than anybody, but it's also, again, a really kind of a little bit scary, a little bit intense, and very eerie and mysterious thing that they did here, where Iris notices that Barry is completely different, and then Barry is completely infected by Bloodwork, becoming the Negative Flash, or at least looking like the Negative Flash. He isn't infected by the Negative Speed Force, they're using something else for that, but he has the exact same design as the Negative Flash in the comics, and he looks so cool and so scary and so disturbing that they pulled it off very well, which I think this is the main reason they made Bloodwork completely black, like his blood is black, because here the red wouldn't do much to him because it would be the same color as his costume, while the black makes him look like the Negative Flash. I just hope that Ramsey's full final form is red, because we know that the final scene where he fights the Flash in his final form will be at night, so if it's black, it probably won't look very good, so hopefully that form is red, but it certainly makes sense that everything else has been black, especially with the Negative Flash. And not only is his design really creepy, but his lightning, the blue and white combination, which reminds me both of Savitar and Zoom, is really creepy, and it's so cool. Like, they've obviously done evil Flash before with Savitar and the other evil speedsters, who some of them are even scarier, but I think this is what Savitar should have been like. He's such a scary version of Barry Allen, this creepy, disturbing version of Barry Allen with the whitish, bluish lightning. This is what it could have been, and this is so much better. Even though Savitar looks cool, this version of the Flash, of an evil Barry Allen, is a lot creepier and a lot scarier. And then he goes to Bloodwork, he bows to him, which is such an awesome moment, and Ramsey finally calls himself Bloodwork, which is such an awesome moment. And I gotta say, based off this episode, a couple other episodes in the season so far, Ramsey Rosso, aka Bloodwork, has got to be one of the best main villains on the Flash and the Arrowverse ever. He's certainly, I don't think, as good as Eobard or Zoom, but he is certainly already better than Savitar the Thinker, and obviously the two versions of Cicada, and he is, I think, going to go down as one of the best villains in the Arrowverse, and I'm hoping in the next episode he continues this trend of how awesome and menacing and creepy he is. So that's the Flash's storyline, which I absolutely loved enough for, while the other storyline isn't necessarily great. It doesn't really bother me that much because this storyline with Barry is so amazing that it makes it already my favorite episode of The Flash since Enter Flash Time. But while the Iris storyline wasn't great, it wasn't actually bad either. And when it comes to an Iris storyline, this is basically the best you can get, as this is what she should do. She's supposed to be a journalist, which they kind of lost sight of in season kind of like 3, 4, and 5. In season 1 and 2, she definitely did some journalizing, and then in season 3, there was the whole storyline of her dying, which they focused on, but in season 4 and 5, she was a member of Team Flash, even a leader in season 5, and in season 4 actually, but it just didn't work. Here, however, Iris being a journalist, it's what she's supposed to do as a character. She's a journalist, she's a love interest for Barry Allen, and while I don't think you could do a Flash TV show without Iris, you can't also not use Iris, like, at all, where she doesn't appear, so I think it makes a lot of sense to give her this journalist storyline. But another thing they focus on is the crisis, the new newspaper she is writing, and obviously her point of view that her husband is about to die, which I think works really well. And while this storyline is certainly not the highlight of the episode, whenever it cut away from Barry's storyline to this one, I lost a little bit of interest comparatively. It's still not bad in the slightest, and I don't think it brings down this episode at all. And honestly, I'm kind of interested in what they're exploring with what Iris is uncovering in this and the next episode. And one other thing from this episode is there's one scene with Nash Wells where he finally breaks through the wall, the Eternium wall, and finds something left behind by the Monitor, these symbols on this Eternium wall, which is obviously a reference to what's been mentioned by Mark Guggenheim on Twitter, the 7 Paragons, which is something that they're going to explore in the actual Crisis, which is not something from the comics as far as I know, but it's clearly going to be some sort of Justice League, 7 different heroes they focus on, each having a very large role in the coming Crisis. I do think this is what they're showing here, and who these 7 Paragons are, I don't know. It's obvious that the one on the far right is the green arrow. That is a arrow symbol. I think the third to the left is the Flash's cowl. I would think that for the Flash they would show a lightning bolt symbol, but it does look like the Flash's cowl. And I think one of them is going to be Ryan Choi. Maybe one of them is going to be Superman or something, but I don't know who these symbols are. They're very vague. They don't really look much like any symbols other than the arrow that we see on the far right, and also Barry's cowl. None of them really look much like any of the Arrowverse's heroes or villain symbols, so we'll just have to wait for maybe the next or the crossover to find out what these symbols mean and who the 7 Paragons are. But I think we could say for without a doubt that Green Arrow and the Flash are 2 of them. In conclusion, this episode is absolutely awesome. It's by far the best episode of the season so far, and it's better than any episode in Season 5, better than any episode in Season 4 except for Enter Flash Time, and like I said earlier, definitely the best episode since Enter Flash Time, because of the Iris storyline, which again isn't bad, it's just not amazing. This episode will not be a perfect 10 out of 10, but I do think it is the closest to a 10 out of 10 we've gotten in a very, very long time. So while I can't really give it a 10 out of 10, I think I'll give it a 9.9 out of 10, as it is almost perfect. So let me know your thoughts about this episode in the comments down below, and if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching, and make sure to stay tuned for my review for Arrow, which is coming out probably soon.